65% in just over a year. And as you start to look at these charts, it is really amazing. They've scrubbed essentially this rapid rise in injuries has been scrubbed. And of course, they say that's to maintain compatibility and with consistency with the CDC figures. Well, why don't the CDC figures report the data accurately, we could ask. Now, we see this is not just the United States, it's also in the UK. An article that just came out today in The Independent says thousands of teenage girls enduring debilitating illnesses after routine school cancer vaccination. This, of course, is the infamous HPV vaccine, which Rick Perry tried to mandate in Texas. They say when Karen Riles was asked to sign a consent form, oh, they actually have consent forms in the UK. That's what they don't want us to have here. We still do have informed consent, and they still have it in the UK. That's what they're trying to remove. And you need to ask yourself why we would have our informed consent removed. Why would they remove years' worth of data that shows a rapid rise in the number of people who are injured by these vaccines? Well, of course, they know that if you know all of this, just like if you knew what was in these secret trade partnership agreements, which are really treaties, if you really were informed, you wouldn't stand for what they're doing to you. So let me give you this particular case that they run down here. This is a lady, Karen Riles. She was asked to sign consent forms so her then 13-year-old daughter, Emily, could be vaccinated against cervical cancer. Yet the past 4 years have turned into a nightmare for the family as Emily soon suffered side effects. Only 2 weeks after her first HPV injection, the teenager experienced dizziness and nausea. They say the symptoms grew increasingly worse after the second and third injections, and I went to A&E several times with severe chest and abdominal pains, as well as difficulty breathing, she said. She's now 17. One time, I couldn't move anything on one side of my body. I didn't know what was happening. Now, they say that prior to this, she was very healthy. She had an unremarkable medical history. She was also very involved in athletics. She was on the hockey, netball, athletics team. She was a keen dancer, they say. Now, listen to the way she was received by the doctor when she went in. She said, every visit to a doctor was met with rolled eyes, said her mother. Every mention of the HPV vaccination was met with hostility, with ridicule. You know, she must be some kind of a conspiracy theorist because vaccines would never harm anyone. That's the lie they want you to believe. That's the lie where they will remove the data from the vaccine court's published information to keep you believing that lie. She says, we were eventually referred to a local pediatrician who told her to push herself to get back to normal. Yeah, just think positive thoughts. It doesn't matter what that stuff did to you that we injected with you. She says, we all feel tired in the morning, she told Emily. That was one of the remarks regarding her complete exhaustion. Now, if you look at this chart on here, you'll see that the number of people that have reported drug reactions in the UK, you see down at the bottom of the chart, the HPV, that's way higher than anything else. It's about 8,200 cases. Those are just the ones that were reported, and that was just in the UK. Following that closely is influenza virus, about 3,000 there, and about 1,600 of the mumps vaccine, the measles, mumps, and rubella, the MMR, the one that we have to mandate now all over the country. Remember, because we had a couple of people, they tell us, got measles in Disneyland. That's why we have to take away informed consent. But of course, that's the third highest damaging vaccine per the statistics out of the UK. Now, just as they want to force dangerous, ineffective medications on you that are very profitable, they also want to withhold things that are safe and effective but don't make any money for them, like medical marijuana. Fortunately, in Texas, we do have a medical marijuana bill. It's not much, but it is a big step in the right direction. Article up on INFOWARS.com, Texas marijuana legalization 2015, cannabis oil to be allowed for epilepsy treatment, says Governor Abbott. They say that he said on Sunday, yesterday, that he will sign a bill that will legalize cannabis oil as a treatment for epilepsy. Now, this is a very, very narrow scope. Only for epilepsy, and only if you've got a doctor's prescription. And I haven't seen all of the details about how you get that, but I've heard reports that, of course, you're going to have to try all the other therapies that are offered by the big pharmaceutical companies before you will be allowed to do that. Nevertheless, there's about 150,000 people in Texas, they presume, that are suffering from epilepsy that cannot get any relief from pharmaceutical synthetic drugs. And so they are going to graciously allow them to do this. But this brings up a key question. If you have to have a prescription written by a physician, How are you going to get that, considering the fact that it is against federal law for the physicians to prescribe this? They say Senate Bill 339 does not legalize marijuana for recreational medical use, rather specifies the single use of cannabis oil. Now, here is a key point. Of course, marijuana is a Schedule I drug, which says that there is no medical use for that drug, and it is highly addictive. That's why 80% of the people in our prison population, our drug prison population, and that is huge. We have more people per capita by far than any other country in the world, far more than any other country in history, and 80% of the people that are there for drug charges are there for marijuana, maintaining the fact that it is a Schedule I drug, which it clearly isn't. They have just admitted here that it is effective for epilepsy. We know it's effective for glaucoma. We know it's effective for some other things. So they're maintaining this lie that it is a Schedule I drug while allowing it for one single thing. And so you have to ask, if they would have compassion for that one disease, why wouldn't they take David Simpson's approach, a Texas legislator who offered a bill that would essentially remove marijuana from the Texas legal code? It is a natural substance. The government should not be regulating it, and the federal government has absolutely no constitutional authority to do that. That's why they created a separate amendment for alcohol. That's why we have 2 of those amendments in there. Now, in another related story, of course, we learned over the weekend that Joe Biden's son, Beau Biden, contracted brain cancer suddenly and died over a very short period of time. A very sad story, and it's even sadder, I think, when we look at what we know about medical marijuana and about Joe Biden's role in keeping it off of the market, keeping it away from patients. We learned back in November, yet another study came out that marijuana kills brain cancer cells. The active molecules in cannabis kill brain cancer, says yet another study. Scientists using an extract of whole plant marijuana, rich in pot's main psychoactive ingredient, THC, as well as CBD, showed dramatic reductions in tumor volumes of a type of brain cancer. And they say marijuana kills cancer in proportion to its dose and duration of treatment, researchers found. And they found that whole plant cannabis that was rich in THC was more efficacious than pure lab-grade THC alone. Now, think about that. And then think about that in February of last year, Joe Biden came out and bragged about how he was the guy who gave us drug czars. How, in spite of the fact that they had just had an election in D.C. saying they were going to legalize marijuana, he was going to hold hard against that. Here's some of the quotes that Joe Biden said about how he approached marijuana. He said in the Senate, Biden was, this is from Time magazine, Biden was on the forefront of the Democrat Party's war on crime, he said. It's a war of drugs. Authoring or co-sponsoring legislation that created the federal drug czar and mandatory minimum sentencing for marijuana. So he's the guy that gave us our first drug czar. Remember when we had William Bennett, we had our first czar. We went full-on authoritarian, like one of the worst Russian rulers. We took that name on. We came up with mandatory minimums. That was Ronald Reagan and Joe Biden in there, sending people to jail for a massive amount of times. So many people going to jail for so long that they had to let out violent criminals so that they could fulfill the mandatory minimum requirements of Joe Biden and Ronald Reagan. And so he says, I'm not only the guy who did the crime bill and the drug czar, but I'm also the guy who spent years, when I was chairman of the Judiciary Committee, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, trying to change drug policy relative to cocaine, for example, crack and powder. That was probably about the same time that the government was bringing in crack cocaine to finance the Iran-Contra scandal. But isn't it sad that just as we saw with Dennis Hastert being hoisted by his own petard, he's facing jail time, not because of sexual crimes that have long since passed the statute of limitation, even though he should be going to jail for that. No, if he goes to jail, it will be for structuring his cash withdrawals, something that he put in, the Patriot Act, something he helped to shepherd through with the Patriot Act. And so here we see yet another one of these politicians whose family and who has personally been struck by the consequences of the evil laws that they have passed. Joe Biden's son dying, perhaps, I don't know, but perhaps he could have been helped. Perhaps his life could have been extended. Perhaps he could have even have been cured But no, we can't have safe and effective medication. We need drug czars and we need mandatory minimums. Stay with us. We're going to be right back, and we're going to talk about the TPP and how easily politicians have been bought. Stay with us. As The Guardian points out, last week was the best of weeks and the worst of weeks for Dennis Hastert. Of course, he began the week by closing on a $25 billion merger between a couple of the largest tobacco companies, creating a 34% market share for the resulting company. That's what these guys do. Of course, Dennis Hastert and the rest of the politicians, just as we see with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Transatlantic Partnerships, we see that what they're trying to do is consolidate ownership of everything to one or two companies. That's what all these companies are trying to do. That's their mechanism. And of course, people like Dennis Hastert, they're their guys. They're the go-to guys that they go to for this. But then, of course, by the end of the week, he had been caught in something that may send him to jail for 530 years. Not the sexual assault, but the Patriot Act, structuring of cash, the war on cash, the criminalizing of cash that he put into the Patriot Act. That may wind up sending him to jail for 530 years. Now, it's interesting to look at this, of course. It's what they do. They lobby federal regulators. They say, and look at the money that he's making as he's doing this, as he's creating these monopolies for various industries. They say even though he was employed as a lobbyist, he was still getting paid $40,000 per month. $40,000 per month. That's just his retirement benefits from being Speaker of the House in Congress. But then, of course, he also had speaking fees. He had consultancy fees. He sat on the board of CME Group. That's the Chicago-based financial giant that owns things like the entire Chicago Board of Trade. Okay, he's on the board of directors of that. What's he been doing? Well, he's been working for the government of Turkey. He's been working for big energy, for real estate interests, for spa services. I wouldn't think that would be too large. But then, of course, big tobacco. And of course, one of these companies that merged with Reynolds, Lorillard Tobacco, had paid him $2.6 million in 2011, $2.3 million in 2012, $2.7 million in 2013. So isn't that nice how that all worked out? He was just a high school wrestling coach, and he had a penchant for evidently sexually molesting his students, and he's pulled out of that and put into a position of authority because they can control him. And it certainly paid off handsomely. But he's not the only one, of course. We've got an article up on INFOWARS.com tracking how little it cost to buy congressmen. He had a pretty high price, but the other guys will sell you out a lot cheaper than that. This is how little it costs Goldman Sachs to bribe America's senators in order to fast-track Obama's TPP bill. And what we see here is a chart. And if you look at the chart, you'll see Goldman Sachs up at the top, way more than anybody else, contributing to an organization called the U.S. Business Coalition for TPP. Now, what they did was they took data from the FEC, the Federal Election Commissions, and they looked to see who were the biggest contributors to this pro-TPP lobbying group. Then they looked to see who got the money. But let's first look at the contributors. We've got Goldman Sachs out there, more than 2-to-1 over the number 2, which is UPS. FedEx is also pretty close up there as well. So I guess you're going to see a lot more business being shipped back and forth if they have this trade agreement. I don't know how much you get paid for shipping a job. I don't know if you ship jobs using UPS and FedEx. I think you use something else for that. But then, of course, the banks are there quite a bit. Citigroup, others. Facebook is there. And then, of course, we see media companies like Time Warner and Viacom. They say it didn't cost that much, actually. They spread the cash around. You remember at the beginning of the week, there was that filibuster from Democrats, and basically they weren't really trying to stop the bill. They're just saying, you're going to have to pony up with more cash. That cash turned out to be $1.1 million. They say of the total given, an average of $17,676 was donated to each of the yes votes. They say that average Republicans got $19.6, the average Democrats got $9.7 thousand. And it's interesting that you see a couple of the names that have really been fighting hard to stop Rand Paul on the Patriot Act. We see Senator Richard Burr of North Carolina got $60,000, because we were just talking about the averages. And then we see Chuck Grassley of Iowa got $35,000. Some others get some special mention on this. We need to remember who stood for this and who caved in for it. Now, of course, in this article, One thing that they got wrong was the votes. They crossed the votes up. The people who voted to stop the filibuster, and that was